It was one of the reasons why we just wanted to rewrite our vows, just because when we reread that document recently, we're like, wow, okay, that was so far off. We've got to
start again, really. We never actually had an official marriage certificate. Gloriavale wrote their own, which we have. They told us that the government would recognise
the legality of it.
And the government didn't,
No,
and we found out we were not actually legally married.
It was one example of how easily led we were, really, in so many ways.
Marriage in Gloriavale was like everything else, in that it was seen very much as a part of your commitment to the church, and then your commitment to your wife or your husband was an extension of that. Yeah.
Because it was in the marriage documents that if your spouse ever left the community, you would never go with them.
With them, that's right.
And that if your spouse ever disagreed with the leaders, you would also go along with their leadership.
Against them.
A big thing for me approaching marriage and preparing for marriage was that if I followed God's will in my marriage, that in 25 years it would still be the right thing.
It was built on the right foundation, then it was going to survive, and the right foundation was to give up yourself, to give up your opinions and your own personal desires, and life would work, which I think there's actually a lot of truth in that. Like, there was no divorce allowed in Gloriavale, so you knew that whoever was chosen for you, you were going to have to work really hard and be pretty intentional about making that relationship work.
I was about 20 when I thought it would be, okay to get married. I basically went and talked to Hopeful and told him that I'd like to get married and believed that was a good thing to do, etc. And he was supportive in that and said, right, we'll go and pray, and I'll pray too. And for 2 weeks, I just came back and he asked the same thing again.
But you weren't allowed to have already chosen somebody. You had to just be willing to marry anybody.
Like, there's
There's
real
not a whole lot of hope.
anticipation of joy or happiness or any of that. It's just like, oh, this is my lot, this is my cross to carry, and I didn't expect to actually
be happy. Yeah.
Like,
That
I think
sounds
that was normal
crazy,
for us,
but-
eh?
And so then he said, well, have you thought about Gloriana? And I actually hadn't, because she was 3 years younger than me. She wasn't even 18 at that time, and I was coming up 21, and so I hadn't actually thought of her. And the other thing is, she was just way out of my league anyway. Way better than I could ever hope to
Not true.
achieve. But I think that was the lightning bolt that hit me right about then. Was like, what? Her?
My mum just had a conversation with me one day and said, oh, there's a young man who's been told that he's marrying you, and how do you feel about it? It's Zion. And I said, okay. Well, I was actually happy not to get married just yet. I'm still 17. So I had grown up seeing what my options were and hoping and hoping and hoping that it wasn't going to be some people. So when I found out it was Zion, it was like, okay, this could be good.
Our courtship was only 6 weeks, and that was sort of underpinned by this thought that, young people, especially men, can't control themselves. They can't be expected to.
I remember one time he was away in a bush area not far from the community chainsawing. I took one of my cousins with me to be the chaperone, and I went and saw him for a little bit. That was very brave of me to do something like that. But I was feeling a bit desperate because we only had like 2 weeks till we were getting married, and I felt like I'd hardly seen him and I hardly knew who this guy was.
We were strangers, we didn't know each other. We had such a short courtship, and I just kept working and worked very hard, and that was my number one priority.
We were community people,
Yeah, both of us
first
were.
and foremost, and that made it take a lot longer for us to actually build a relationship.
Because of the expectations of the culture we're in, what we were taught, and probably one of the biggest ones was just the prioritisation of the needs of the community, the needs for work, the needs for just giving yourself to do whatever was needed.
Yeah, it was whatever was needed, always needed to come first, because even to care for your own husband or your own family was selfish.
It brought a lot of tension
Yeah, it pulled us apart.
between us, yeah.
It really did.
Yeah, there's times when I was away working because I was flying for 4 years.
Right from the very beginning though,
Right from the beginning.
like we were married, and within weeks, or straight away, he was on night shift. So he would be out doing excavator work on the farm every single night.
All night.
We were given a room in a shed. That was our new home to live in. And I'd be out there in this cold shed by myself night after night, and just feeling so lonely. You know, I was 18 years old. And I remember one night just walking back to my family's room and saying, "Mum, I just want to sleep here. I'm so alone. And I don't know why I bothered getting married, because there's no one there with me." It was no way to actually build a marriage. But we were both so determined to be community people, and we kind of didn't know how much we needed to prioritise each other and be intentional about our marriage, and that it wasn't selfish to do that.
Anyone that we saw in the community, any couples that we saw doing that, we thought they were just being selfish.
They were looked down on.
They were looked down on, and they were, you know, people made sort of snide remarks about those couples.
Kind of people, yeah.
Those kind of people, and we didn't want to be those kind of people. Probably one of the biggest things that was taught in Gloriavale and emphasised a lot in marriage and actually in every family relationship was the conditional love, that your love to your spouse, your love to your children, your love to your family was conditional on their love and obedience to the church and obedience to God and all of that. And so you would only love them, you would only live in that relationship while and if they continued to live according to these other expectations.
Naturally, the women in Gloriavale were more compliant and easier to bring into line than the men. So the marriage role for a woman was almost tied up with helping to keep her husband compliant to the leadership and looking for any way he was stepping out of line.
There was really just an absolute inherent trust expected in the system and in the leadership.
A blind trust in the leaders, but not the same in each other.
No, definitely not.
It's interesting for me looking back as a young wife, because I know that my goals for Zion were that he would be like the leaders. And that sounds strange, but because I revered and respected the leadership so much, the things that bothered me most about him were where he wasn't complying with them. You know, our security was so tied up with the system that we treated our husbands and our children like they just needed to be in line with the system. That was going to be how we would survive and thrive as a family. I remember one time when he came home and told me that he'd met Christian people who were really good Christians, and I said, "Really?" And he was talking about how they were generous and kind, and I was like, "But do they live in community, and do they do this, and do they do all these other things that we'd been taught a Christian must do?" And it's like, "Oh, no, but you know, they believe in God and they love Jesus." And I was like, there's something happening in your thinking. How can you think that Christians can be Christians when they're living a lifestyle like that.
Anyone that was different to us was either not a Christian at all or was, a lower level of Christian. They hadn't attained to the truth that we had.
And one of the leaders even said, if we let people think they could be Christians outside the community, well, then no one will stay. I really hoped that Zion would stay loyal. I remember thinking, I think he's a good guy, and I hope he's going to last, because if he goes, I'm not going.
There were some examples where husband and wives and whole families had gone together, and we were taught and told, and our understanding was that, look, they've taken all those lovely children now to the world, and what chance do they ever have?
Because now they're all going to hell.
If I was going to go, and then Gloriana, as my wife, would go with me, then what hope do our children have of ever coming back to the community, of ever finding God? And so that was a huge burden to actually carry for each other.
I think as a young couple starting off, we wanted to do everything we could to avoid that.
I think it's a really important question to ask is why? What were they afraid of? Why wouldn't they just let people thrive, let them just go and live for God, go and be led? And I think it comes back to that foundational premise that Gloriavale was the only right way and the only right path, and
the only true church.
The only true church. And if anyone tried to do anything outside of that, well, they were just deceived and they were just deluded. And that was written into the document that you sign for membership. The commitment document was that if ever I break any of these promises, that I do so to the peril of my soul.
You're expected to sign it before you're 18, and it was one of the requirements for even getting married that you'd made a commitment to the church.
And that included never actually challenging the leadership, never actually even questioning anything they said, to the peril of your soul. Pretty crazy now.
It had us tied up quite well.
Yeah.
I always wanted to be a good husband and a good father, and I always felt like I wasn't. I've always felt like I wasn't good enough. I always felt like, as a Christian, that I wanted to grow, I wanted to walk closer with the Lord. And I was talking with Gloriana's dad, and he had been listening to an American pastor, and so I was actually in America at the time, and I was working out at the gym one morning at the hotel where I was staying, and I started watching this YouTube video of a sermon preaching, and I guess it just clicked in my brain of, this is of God, this is what I need, this is actually going to help me be a better father, be a better husband, be a better Christian. And so I downloaded some books and started listening, and so that was probably the single biggest turning point.
I was just really scared about the changes I saw in him. Like, he was suddenly just really into these books, and I didn't even know what they were for a start, but I knew something was changing in him. He had this keen desire to learn about something, and he was changing the way he was parenting. And there was a time when I was so distressed about the direction Zion was going in, and so afraid for him, so afraid for his salvation, that I actually wrote a letter almost begging them, because I was that desperate, that he be taken out of the work that he was doing, because he was travelling overseas. And I never gave it to anyone. I decided to just put it in my drawer and pray about it, which I think was the best thing to do. I just gave it to the Lord, because here's my husband, who I actually love. Why am I so afraid for him? He's being the man that he should be. He loved us. He was a great dad. He was having the courage to speak his mind. And I realised that's what he was supposed to be doing. That's what men should be allowed to do. And I actually felt really proud of him for starting to stand up and speak up. That's what men had kind of been conditioned to do there. Like, it was dangerous territory to go and learn for yourself. And one of my sisters summed it up really well when I was having a chat with her, and I said, just read your Bible a lot and see what it says. And she was saying, well, actually, one of the leaders was telling me I need to be careful doing that, and especially my husband needs to not do that too much, because when people start doing that, they end up leaving the community.
And one of my friends said to me, I don't even need to read the Bible, because what if what I read is different to what the leaders teach? Then I have to make a choice. And so I'd rather not read the Bible. I'll just get what I need from them. And he's now one of the leaders. My transition of loyalty was from the church, aka the leaders, to God and to his word and to who he was. And that did take time, partly with just pulling down my wrong understanding of the church and the place of the church. And I remember coming back from America one time and saying to Gloriana, I wonder what God's view is of Gloriavale. What is the 30,000 foot view? And just having that thought, and just to realise that there was just so much that didn't line up.
There was a gradual journey and a process of realising that I was actually committed to my husband, and it was a transfer of loyalty from the leadership to him. I got to that place where I realised that I didn't have to keep looking for this perfection in my husband to be loyal to him and to trust him, because our marriage was before God, and God was bigger than our human weaknesses. God was bigger than the leadership and their expectations and all the flawed things that we saw around us. It was like the community was losing its grip on me. And that was really scary, because there was coming a point where I'd be at a crossroads and I'd have to choose. One particular moment was when Zion got me to watch a YouTube video of a sermon, which I was like, I nearly didn't watch it because I was so afraid to, and I knew it wasn't allowed. But I don't know, I guess I was curious, and I watched it, and I said to him, every single word of that was truth. It felt like we'd been starving and not eaten for forever, and suddenly a meal was given to us, and I started to just want more of this. Like, hey, this could be good. This could be good for us. It could be good for our children. It could be good for everybody. Let's share this around.
At that time, there was just massive turmoil and upset about hopefully died. The leader that came on was saying things like, and if anyone has ideas, come and talk to me. So he said, right, we need to write a letter. Let's list all the things, and list the things that the problems that we see, the answers that we see. And I wanted a second opinion. I didn't just trust myself on it. I sent the letter to an independent pastor and just said, look, just please have a read of this and just tell us what you think. And his response was, everything in that letter is very good, and if you get kicked out of Gloriavale because of what's in that letter, then it's just the mercy of God to your family. And so that gave us a lot of peace.
It did give us some peace.
It was actually God working.
And he was going to take care of us with whatever the next step was.
The letter that we'd written was completely rejected by the leadership, and they said, we're not changing anything. We've lived this way for 50 years. And I was still, stalling for time in a lot of ways. I said, well, I would have to go and rethink it. Let's go through the letter and see if there's anything in there that in good conscience I could let go of. And at that point, the leader kind of snapped, and he said, no, we reject the whole thing, absolutely. And if you can't do that, you can't stay here. And we just said, well, they've actually made the choice for us because we just can't comply. It would be wrong, it would be against our conscience. There's just no way. We made that decision together, and then we just packed up and went.
I remember feeling like we were just stepping off a cliff, you know, just like piling everyone into a vehicle and going and not knowing what was next. You have to trust that when you're jumping off that cliff that God's going to catch you and you're not just leaving him behind at the community, because that's how you've been taught to think, that if you walk out of here, God's hand is off you from now on. All these bad things are going to happen to you. You know, there's just a lot of fear that can be holding people there. And it was just those first weeks, just day by day, my eyes were just opened to the kindness of people we met. One by one, the lies that we'd been taught were just smashed to pieces.
It was an incredible relief and joy to us is to know God and to know the nature of God and to know that God is good.
Because all of a sudden it wasn't, I'm going to get to heaven if I do all the right things every day and never mess up. It was like, I'm going to get to heaven because I'm a child of God and I'm loved by him, and Jesus paid the price for my sins.
I remember one of the leaders once saying that if you give people the choice and they make a wrong choice, then it's your fault and you're responsible because you gave them the choice.
I remember that one, eh?
Like, just crazy.
That's one thing that has really changed in our parenting too. We try to teach to the heart, and we're not just trying to control all the outcomes. I knew when we were leaving the community that I was actually breaking my wedding vows. But at the same time, I was really sure that I should never have made that promise.
So with our 25th wedding anniversary coming up this year, we really want to reset and renew our vows and promises on a right foundation, and that we're marrying each other and it's unconditional, and that's our commitment.
And so now it's just a nice opportunity to actually put that into words. It's also for our children's sake. It's sort of like setting the standard and the scene for them, for their futures, with how they're going to be thinking about their marriage commitments and what it means and what they're looking for in a marriage partner.
Even though we were thrown together as strangers under a completely legal system, we had no clue of the blessing that God had in store for us.
That's
and the
true.
good things he had, because he's a good God and a faithful God, and that's just something that we are just so thankful for.
It's not a question of whether we should have got married in Gloriavale or we shouldn't have, or whether it should have been an arranged marriage or not, because we just have this real peace that God was over all. He knew we were going to be born there. He knew we were going to be married there. He knew that we were going to have to learn things together there. And yet he's been there the whole way.
You might look back and think, oh, would you rather it was done differently? Or do you regret that it happened that way and everything else? And I think for us, this is our journey, and I love what God has done.
Yeah.
I vow to keep that flame burning, to keep our love at the forefront as we face the trials of this life together. I'm not going to offer you silver or gold, because that will fade away. The most precious gift I can give is my heart, and I vow today that it will always be yours until the end of time.
There is no doubt that God has put us together, and although neither of us are perfect, He has proven that we are perfect for each other. There's no one in this world who makes my heart sing the way that you do.
Now, I'm not sure I get to give permission, but you may kiss your wife.